back to Resilience Builds. My name is Jake. Today, we're in my 1989 Volvo 760 called Von Burgundy. So some of the mods that we've done to Von Burgundy include adding the larger 16G turbo off the Mitsubishi Evo. We've gone to some upgraded aluminum piping, a new intercooler, which is an NPR intercooler out of an Isuzu truck. We've added a new pod filter with an aluminum intake, as well as relocated the oil cooler to fit better under the intercooler, and added an oil catch can, as well as the Enki Amato wheels with Cooper Tires RS3 Xeons. So on stock turbo, I ran 13 pounds, which led to a quarter-mile time of 16.3 at 83 miles an hour. Now that equates to about 155 horsepower to the wheels, 185 horsepower at the crank. So the question is, after we've done all these mods, is Von Burgundy any faster than he was on the stock turbo? Now that's our question, so let's go find out. Alright, well obviously 17.2 seconds is nothing to write home about, so let's take a look at the data and figure out exactly what happened. For further context, I ran Von Burgundy with my brother, who happened to be my cameraman also that day, and the total weight, including some of our camera equipment and extra things in the car, came out to be most likely around 3,700 pounds. So looking at the data from our Draggy, on the left-hand side, we have the stock turbo at 13 pounds, and on the right-hand side, we have the 16G turbo at 8 pounds. Now what this data doesn't tell you is on the left-hand side, I had the chance to make this run on June, where it was nice and dry, and I was in Mexico, and on the right-hand side, this was done at 38 degrees on a really wet day in Mexico. And so take that into account with this data. On the left-hand side, I really think that this was optimized, and I probably wouldn't get much faster than this on that particular road. Whereas on the right-hand side, I do believe that the car could run faster if I was given the same parameters, if it was just me in the car. At roughly just my weight plus the curb weight of the car, I believe that on the 8 pounds on the 16G, I would probably run high 16s, which again is not fast. But the large variance, I think, is mainly going to be coming from the weight, the traction, and ultimately the weather. So one of the first things you'll notice comparing these graphs is that on the left-hand side, the elevation gain was much greater than on the right-hand side. And I believe that where that really starts to affect things is primarily up on the higher end, as that's where you start to see the more gradual elevation gain. Another interesting thing to note is that on the left-hand side, on the smaller turbo, it definitely accelerated quicker out of the hole. And the biggest thing I can relate that to, whereas on the 16G it didn't, is one, it was a smaller turbo, and so it's going to spool up faster. Secondly, on the left-hand side, on the smaller turbo, I loaded up onto the stall of the automatic transmission, which brought it up to 2,200 RPM when I launched, which also on the smaller turbo meant that I was already well within boost. Whereas on the right-hand side, on the 16G, on this wet, rainy day, I only barely got into the stall and maybe left the line at 1500 RPM, which is not enough to even start gaining boost on the 16G. On the 16G, I really don't see any boost until about 2200 RPM and full boost until 3000 RPM. Whereas on the smaller turbo, I was at full boost at least by 2500 RPM. So there's already a 500 RPM difference when max boost is just being reached. One thing to note that I found interesting though, while the data is not perfect and there was a lot of user error in terms of these two launches, is that the 16G seemed to have performed better right there at about 60 miles an hour. If you look in between the second and third quadrant, you'll notice that the accelerations measured in G's on average were a lot higher and had higher spikes compared to the same location on the smaller turbo at 13 psi. This is interesting because this is the upper end of second gear in the Volvo, which leads me to believe that the larger 16G turbo is breathing much more efficiently in the upper RPMs versus the stock turbo even at 13 psi. Just comparing the acceleration between both within this area seems to show that the 16G is allowing the car to accelerate harder at the higher end of the RPM band versus the smaller turbo seems to give the Volvo more acceleration from a dead stop up and through the mid-range. So many lessons learned on this video production. I'm looking forward to doing a more apples to apples comparison of the stock turbo at 13 pounds versus this new 16G at 13 pounds. And hey, if you guys found this video to be valuable, please like, share, and subscribe. And a huge thank you to my brother Eli, who is the cameraman, encourager, and director of this film. If you would like to stay up to date on the channel, you can follow me at Resilience Builds to see everything Von Burgundy. Stay safe during this COVID season and have a nice day.